tell you that over the years he would send me multiple letters.
So when Jerry that was the same day I got my surgery a year ago. I walked in, he was leaving to visit. Do you know where he was? Obviously, you're not out. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like that. Not too bad. She'd been vaccinated, but other than the children, yeah, so she still has, this is a couple of weeks ago, she said, oh my God, been negative for 2 weeks. So she's still alive. Yeah, right, the timing was everything, yeah. Yeah, we have a 4-bedroom house. Their own space. Never makes sense, never made sense. If he's that sick. Well, actually, so she's doing that, but she's working for a while. She's trying to defend her dissertation. Yeah. Or at least the building there. Yeah, thank you. So she ran her first half December, just over 2 hours. And she's scheduled, well, not yet. I told Matt if you're on certain terms, he was and feeling worse. Right. Then she, oh, totally. So he's in the that's what he did this morning. We'll go to the show tonight, so he'll come tonight. But yeah, he's just Gary, we're just it's pretty funny. No. But if we're together, she'll put it right in the middle. Put it to, I missed you Friday, went by Friday for doing that.
Yeah.
No, she's not. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I have a niece of mine, she dates. So there's like a
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
phone dates, yeah. Yeah, she loved it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Like
We did a but it wasn't COVID. It was last week. It's enough. So Brody went, so we left on Wednesday. Yeah. He's running with Rebecca. I started tested. Like, lucky on Wednesday, she got to look at it. Thursday. She like hit a million and she understood that he hurt me. So crazy. Like I couldn't even like that for her. We all get to test. He was the first one.
On Bill's, it was causing some static. And actually, there's already 6 people online. I should go take a look at it just to hear if it's crackling. But if you literally just, if there is a camera.
Teacher's Day on Monday, and the kids were supposed to do that for Tuesday. So we said, no, the kids will come in, get the materials, and we'll go home for the week. So we're like, it's not going to teach, so I did. Like, I can't believe it. I went to yeah. It's not like a corporate office. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. That was like for St. Martin. Right.
So I was going to have the grandchildren and siblings to Leonard sit in the second row. But if you're not actually the grandchildren, raise them this week. Because I have exactly enough for all of the grandchildren. Well, the family's going to be seated there, and the grandchildren.
We can't figure out something. We YouTube.
if you would rather be behind your partner is one of the grandchildren.
Testing. Testing.
Skip it. Once you test positive, it's 90 days until you can test again, which is good because it's the testing.
We're just about to begin. If you would take your seats, please.
Twice a week, and it's local PCR. Nothing for you.
You want to sit on the phone or? Good, good. Can I put it here, mark it? Here, mark it.
Our marker.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a cell phone, please put it into silent mode at this time. Can I ask everybody to please rise?
If you sit here, you can have a child on either side, or you can.
Grandchildren, second row, please. You may be seated.
I didn't realize some of the grandchildren were here. You can sit up and
Lloyd, are there any other announcements you may care to make?
No, you can proceed.
Thank you, sir. When great trees fall, Maya Angelou. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on the kind words unsaid, the promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly, and always irregularly. Space is filled with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us that they existed, and we can be, and be better, for they existed. Mizmor leDavid Adonai ro'i lo efsar, benodeh sheyarbitzeni al mei menuchot yinahaleni, nar sheyeshov yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begetz ha'mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha u'mishantecha hema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged zorai. Tishantam Hashem en roshi kosi rivaya. Tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shaveti b'vet Adonai liorech yamim.
The cantor began with modern words of poem and transitioned into ancient words of the Psalms, beginning traditionally as we do at a funeral with the words of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kirachem av al banim richam Adonai al yirai av, ki hu yadai yitzrenu zachor ki afar anachnu. Enosh kechetzir yamav ketzitza sade ken yatzitz. Ki ruach avra bo ve'enenu velo yakirenu od mekomo. V'chesed Adonai me'olam ve'ad olam al yireyav. V'tzidkato livnei vanim. A selection of the 103rd Psalm. As a father has compassion for his children, God has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over them and they are no more, and no one can recognize where they grew. But God's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, to all the reverent ones, endures age after age, unchanging.
In the poem Invictus, the speaker remarks at the very end, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." Such a man was Len Kosova. Len made it abundantly clear to me that he didn't want long clergy tributes at his service. I have likely gone over my allotted time already. He wanted something understated and simple, as you might infer by the choice of the obituary, which he wrote. As well, you will note the simplicity, possibly, of the casket he chose for burial under this beautiful pall. And at the cemetery, there is to be a bottomless vault as well. For he knew enough medically and felt enough spiritually that he was to return to the bed of God's earth, and that was fine with him. If one might close their eyes and imagine the iconic statuesque profile of Christopher Plummer as he portrayed Baron von Trapp in The Sound of Music, then you see what I see in my mind's eye when I think of Dr. Len Kosova, a man of stature, of dignity, casting off an erudite aura. When we last sat face to face, he was lying down in his bed. Illness had become more aggressive, and Len knew what was in store for him. Though he was lying down, I still felt as I was always looking up to him anyhow. He spoke of his infirmity and handled it as the gentleman he always was. He was composed, genuinely emotional, and yet filled with hope. Hope for the family to flourish even in his absence. Hope for the synagogue to flourish. Hope for the Jewish people to flourish. The one lingering concern he had was for you, Jane. "I want to be sure Jane is taken care of," he uttered as clear as could be. How proud Captain George was of his Maria. The lives you forged together was profound, and the sounds of music that you created in your love, Len did not take for a moment for granted. I've always seen Len as a man of principles and values, a family man, a man of professional standards and wisdom. When he stood in the sanctuary on holy days, he stood out, not because he was taller than most, but because he beamed with pride of Jewish faith, joy of standing alongside his coveted bride, and quelling over the growth of the synagogue, which he did so much to support. Some of us who are maybe more recent members to the Beth Shalom may question, Len Kosova? I don't recall him being that inclined to be involved. Jean, for sure, but Len? Well, it was in the formative years of Beth Shalom that Len gave of his time, and he did so generously. Around 1969 is when he told me he began to get involved. He declined any appointments to leadership positions because he had too many professional appointments in his own office which needed his attention. And if he was going to do something, Len Kosova was going to do it right. How proud, he expressed to me, he was of the career he built, and he marveled at as a founding principal player in the practice, what the younger partners were doing to expand its touch to the infirmed and the care they are now able to offer their patients. Len took immense pride in being with his patients and serving as a trusted guide on their journeys towards health. As a sheepdog sits and purveys its flock, so too when I close my eyes, I see Len standing, a statue of bronze, always dressed dapper, gazing over his flock of children and grandchildren. In our visit, but a couple of weeks ago, he eloquently expressed what nachas, pure joy, he had spending time with each of you when you were small. Notwithstanding, he said, the complex hours of professional obligation he needed to juggle to try to do so. And then maybe more so as adults, what joy he garnered with every occasion of sharing life with you. How proud he was of each of you for becoming you. He spoke with a twinkle in his eye when he related to me the dad letters he would share with many of you. Words such as one might find in the Rudyard Kipling poem, If, which concludes with these words. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. No doubt words such as these filled those beautiful letters. And his voice sang with a cadence of nachas, with passion and fulfillment when he recounted Shabbat dinners that you would have and the traditions in which you all took part. Your family's 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock meetings were his way to bestow upon you his philosophies in life, his wishes for you, his beliefs. In essence, it was his ethical will, not written, but spoken to you from his own life's breaths of experience. He shared with me that he had recently given each of you a book. Whether you read it or not, he had his doubts. But it was another way for Len to inspire your minds and spirits in new ways. He was a pursuer of culture, a pursuer of education, and he wished for you to adopt those passions as well. He had admitted, though he had a deep passion for being Jewish, he wasn't definitively sure what God is, but he still yet had a concrete belief in God. He glowed with an aura of pride when he spoke of yet having possession of his father's phylacteries, his tefillin, ritual items that we wear during prayer. Not sure I recall the last time I wore them, he sheepishly admitted, but I still love having them. His request was to be buried with them, and so he is, as well as his own kippah, which he wore during many of the hours he spent here in prayer in Beth Shalom. His talit is left with the family, to be shared within the family and be present at many family smachot, happy occasions in the years to come. At this time, I'd like to invite the family to come up and share their personal words of honor today. As well, there are some words that have been written by family that Rabbi Melman and I will have the honor to read on your behalf. I shall inform you now that there will be 10 speeches in all. Maybe some repetition of theme and laurels about Lent. But imagine what you might say if you were invited up here. They all come down to the same thing. Len Kosova, family man, prophetic in his career, and a deep loving soul. Jean, you have the honor to come first, please.
Good morning, everybody. If you read Len's obituary, then you read this sentence. I'll pull it together just 1 minute. A man's life must speak for itself or not at all. And it speaks differently to each person. That's it. One sentence. That's what he wanted. In planning for his funeral, these were his wishes. No over-the-top obituary making me or my life sound better than it was. Just say I died and leave it at that. No flowery speeches by the rabbi. Those who knew me will know that the details that speak to them. All of you here were impacted by him in different ways. Let that be his legacy. I would like to tell you how he spoke to me and our family throughout his lifetime. Because of him, 3 wonderful children came into my life 38 years ago, and they brought 3 wonderful partners, and later 5 amazing grandchildren. I had an instant family when we were married, and they have nourished and sustained us all through these years. Because of him, I had 2 beautiful children of my own who have been the joy of my life and helped me to know a depth of love that I could not have known existed within me. But he knew of that kind of love and wouldn't let me even imagine a life without my own children. So he was willing and wanted to start again with me. And they too have brought 2 wonderful partners into our family and 3, soon to be 4, amazing grandchildren. We have a beautiful blended family that he always said is the best legacy anyone could have. Because of him, I got to experience the world. Our travels took us to so many different places and cultures and challenged my fears and exposed me to so much more than I could ever have imagined in my safer, smaller world before him. Because of him, we all know what love is. It's patience, it's sacrifice, it's sharing joy and commitment and hanging in there even in the tough times. And it's what makes us strong and helps us find our way. Because of him, we know what family is. It's laughing, it's learning, it's being real and being friends. And it will always be there no matter what. Because of him, we know what is at the heart of a good life: love and family, those things that are true and lasting. They make a difference, and we know that because of him. 84 years of a life well lived included 58 years of being a father. For his 80th birthday, the 5 children made a book entitled, "You Know You're Len Kosova's Child If," and filled it with 80 examples. Here are a few. You know you're Len Kosova's child if you know all about acids and bases well before your first chemistry class because you were busy titrating pool chemicals at a young age. You've built impressive biceps for a 5th grader by carrying 40-pound bags of water softener salt around the local Aldi store. You were taught the intricacies of a price-to-earnings ratio when your allowance was still 50 cents. You learn about the newest and trendiest restaurants in Chicago from your dad. You consider yourself a lifelong learner. You know how Consumer Reports ranked all the appliances in your friend's new kitchen. You were the first kid on the planet to have a cable modem without cable TV. You have any kind of medical ailment, and your dad's first question is, "When's the last time you moved your bowels?" You were at your first opera at the age of 10. You love travel and new experiences. You are always looking for a good book. Your father is truly a guiding influence on your life. You know that life isn't about money and things you have, but how hard you work and the relationships you make along the way. You believe traditions should stay, but not necessarily the same way. You believe skepticism is a virtue and cynicism is a vice. You believe the future is always better than the past. Those are only 16 of the 80 ways that his children were able to say how his life spoke to them. Len's 84 years included 26 years of being a papa, a role that brought more joy to his life than most. 2 of his granddaughters made a book for him and used these words to describe him: compassionate, brave, strong, inspiring, wise, caring, warm, selfless, and brilliant. And believe it or not, described him as funny and silly. He said to me, "I've never thought of myself that way," and I said, "With your grandchildren, you are." His 84 years included 47 years of being a wonderful physician. I first loved him as a doctor before I fell in love with him. Putting aside his brilliance, it was his compassionate, caring, and empathetic ways he cared for his patients that overwhelmed me, and the respect he showed the nurses and others who cared for his patients. His 84 years included 38 years of being my husband. I cherished our life together and always felt cherished by him. Len, your love has surrounded me, filled me, and brought me to this day. You have prepared me for this time and done everything possible to make it as easy as possible. But the one thing you couldn't do is prepare my heart for going forward. I'm so blessed to be surrounded by loving family and friends who will stand by me throughout this next stage. And I promise that your children and I will get through this together, supporting and loving each other every step of the way. Because that's what you taught us to do. I will miss you and love you forever. So this is the end of what I prepared to say to Len, for Len, but I have something else to add. Most of you do not know that my sister Barb's husband, Dick, died Monday, unexpectedly, in his sleep. 2 days before Len, she and her children, Kelly, Joel, and Neil, did not have the opportunity to prepare or say goodbye as I did. Please surround them with your love and concern today. Barb, I never thought we would walk this path together, but I'm glad we will. I love you. Okay.
These are Avra's words. Describing my dad in just a few words has proven to be a very difficult task. There were so many layers to my dad. Some of you knew him as a friend. Some of you knew him as a doctor. And others of you knew him as a colleague or an uncle or a brother. If you knew my dad, most of you probably knew him as smart. My dad was the smartest person I knew. He valued education more than most things in life, and he never stopped learning himself. Even in his 80s, he took and taught classes at Northwestern, and he was always reading and keeping himself up to date on new things, whether it was the newest procedures in medicine or the ins and outs of Snapchat and Instagram. You probably also knew him as a hard worker. My dad worked hard for all he achieved in his life, and his achievements were definitely many. He grew up in a poor family and started working at a very young age to help provide for them. He studied hard. He skipped 2 grades in high school and graduated early, went on to college and then to medical school. In talking with him over the years and reflecting on my childhood, he would always say, I could have given you more and made life a little easier sometimes, but what would that have taught you? He believed in working hard for the things that you want. If you knew my dad, you probably knew him to be emotional. He was the first to stand up and give a speech whenever the opportunity presented itself, and it wasn't unusual for him to cry most of the way through it. He would always get choked up talking about how lucky he was to have 5 healthy children, and of course, He could never get through talking about his love for Mom without shedding some tears. If you knew my dad, you may have known him as opinionated. He definitely had opinions on many issues, and he was knowledgeable and could speak on almost any topic. He wasn't afraid to share what he knew. But the best part of having conversations with him was that he really did want to hear from the other, even those who disagreed with him. He enjoyed hearing other perspectives and seeing things from others' points of view. It's how you learn about the world, he would always say. But if you knew my dad as Dad, you knew that he was all of this and so much more. As a dad, he was your biggest cheerleader. Whenever something good happened in any of our lives, he was the first to text or email the group to announce and brag about one of our accomplishments. And whenever you'd go to him for advice, he'd normally say something like, "Trust yourself. Take a chance and see what happens, and know that Mom and I always have your back." If you knew him as a dad, you knew that he was fair. He had 5 children who all have different needs and our own ups and downs throughout the years. He was always the first to want to help, but he made sure to tell us all, just because I do something for one of you doesn't mean I need to do the same for all of you. He saw all 5 of his kids uniquely, and he loved us all for our differences. If you knew him as a dad, he was your go-to for everything. Growing up, he'd always joke with us and say, "I know everything." But he really, truly did. And he always gave the most level-headed advice about everything: relationships, marriage, financial decisions, fix-it things around the house, even the newest and trendiest restaurants to try. If you knew him as a dad, you would have known him as compassionate. Most of all, you probably don't know that before every important occasion in our lives, whether it was a bat mitzvah, a graduation, a wedding, or the birth of a child, he would write us a letter in the same blue folder with gold edging around the border that shared his thoughts on that particular milestone and what it meant to him in his life. But I think one of the best stories that highlights how compassionate my dad was is the story of the round table in his office at work. When he designed that space, he purposely chose a round table rather than a desk, because I want to be sitting next to someone, not across from them, when I deliver that kind of news, he would say. There are so many ways to describe my dad, but no matter how you knew him, you know that your life has been forever changed because he was a part of yours. I've been reading a lot about grief these past few months, and there is one quote that I've been reading over and over. It says, "Grief, I've learned, is really just love. And it's all the love that you want to give, just with no place to go." Dad, I hope that when you see all of these tears today, all of the grief, that you know it's just a whole lot of love for you. I hope you'll see it as a sign of how much you were and will continue to be loved. Thank you for the millions of ways you've impacted all of our lives, and for making someone so hard to say goodbye to. I love you. Jamie is to be invited now, please, to speak.
They're both good. Well, Kendra said there would be a lot of repetition, and boy, I guess we do it well. So, all of our lives, boy, Wes, I should have gone with the bigger font. It's hard to see for the tears and blurs the words. All of our lives are really a collection of stories. And the longer we live, and the more experiences we have, the more stories there are. Some of them are our own stories, and many more are other people's stories about us. Some are wonderful stories that highlight our best qualities, and others not so much. Some are fascinating and riveting, and others are a bit more mundane. Of course, the more people we know, the more stories there are. As all of you know, Dad embraced almost every waking hour of life to the fullest. And so his life touched so many people. and he created volumes of stories that live on in each of us. I want to invite you to test this out for a moment. Most of you are here because you have a story about Dad, or Len, or Dr. Kosova, or Uncle Len, or Papa. Maybe you have many stories that you carry with you. Choose one right now. Anyone, and just recall the story in your mind. Now the room is filled in some ways with his life again, and in this way he lives on in each of us and in all of us together. Think about sharing that story that you just reflected on with someone later as we gather to honor Dad. Before we live here today, you'll hear many more stories of Dad's life. Commemorations like today seem to challenge us to distill someone's life into such a small space. So I thought I would push it a bit further. What if we could distill it down just to a few words? I came up with 3: live, love, and learn. Live because nothing was more precious to Dad than life. His life, our lives, the lives of his patients, the lives of his community. And living that life meant exploring everything life had to offer. From music, to food, to travel, to art, to sports, well, Jean helped him find that one, to religion, to investment, to flowers, to home improvement, to making ice cream himself, really good ice cream. Everything was part of life. That was part of life, was to be explored and experienced to the fullest. There's a big world out there, and he saw it as his to explore. Maybe even his obligation to explore. And explore we did. When I was a very young girl, I remember walking around the exquisite lyric opera in a flowing green velvet dress, so proud to be holding his hand. And much later, river rafting on the Salmon River when I was 16 and seeing Dad sport facial hair for the first and last time. Just for the record, he was much more comfortable at the lyric with opera stars than camping under the Idaho twinkling stars, but all were part of life and living. Love, because it drove almost everything he did. Dad loved deeply and became quite a crier just past middle age, I think. I rarely saw him cry out of sadness, though. He welled up when he talked about how much he loved Jean and all of his children and grandchildren, and how much our large extended family meant to him. And he devoted himself to ensuring that we all held each other in high regard. He made sure we all had the opportunity to stay connected by sharing news, making sure we could all gather for holidays, family vacations, even as the family grew larger. My children remember clearly that every time we all got together, even to the very last time, just a couple weeks ago, and even during our Zoom Shabbats, he reminded us all that being together, loving one another, family, was most important. Even when they aren't nearby. When Jilly was born, he hopped on a plane to the UK. When we brought Yasha home, he embraced him with open arms like he'd known him since the day he was born. And when Brendan was born, he was with me at NICU in Texas, consulting with doctors in the day, and both consoling me and explaining everything in the long evenings while we waited for Brendan to come home. Distance was never a barrier to love, and it won't be now. And finally, learn. Learn and teach every day. At work and at home, read, learn more, study, teach, and then the next day do it again. Read books, magazines, consumer reports, there's a theme there. Read Blood and Hematology Today. Read novels and new translations of old novels. Read history and more history. Watch the news, read the newspaper. The paper version. Study the stock market. Know the history of your city. Learn the history of every city you've ever traveled to. Teach others so you can learn from them along the way. Learn the story of every chef at every fine restaurant you've ever dined. All learning is good and endless and even sacred. Until very recently, Dad was teaching and learning at Northwestern, where he took and taught continuing education courses. And it wasn't just learning for himself. On each birthday, from the day they were born, Dad set up and gifted each grandchildren with a contribution to their college fund. They still got the fun gifts from Papa and Grandma Jean on their birthdays, of course. But as they got older, they learned that they had been receiving much more than that, the ever-accumulating gift of learning. So, if you want to know what to do in Dad's honor today and moving forward, I would make sure you live, really live. Let the people in your life know how much you love them, and commit to learning something new every day. That's it. It seems so small, but for me, it is truly Dad's commitment to those core principles that made his life large and important and meaningful to all of us here today. I love you, Dad, and I'll do my best to honor your life in the way you taught us to honor ours.
These words I offer come from Jason. I'd like to thank Cantor Store for delivering these thoughts today on my behalf. This is a very emotional time for me, and I'm not really sure if I'd be able to get through this. It's difficult to know what to say right now. My father was truly a remarkable man. I began thinking many weeks ago about how to summarize the 84-year-long life of someone with so many facets. But I kept coming back to 4 areas that I feel really defined him. My father's Judaism and his relationship with God was a huge guiding force in his life. This was something instilled in him by his father, Bernard. From a young age, Leonard applied his teachings of the Torah and the life lessons of Judaism to help him navigate through life. Many times, I viewed my father as a man whose value system was rooted in the old world, and throughout his life, he adapted to living in the modern one. Without Judaism and his commitment to God, my father would have been a much different person. Leonard's family was his life's most important responsibility and his greatest source of joy. To call him a family man doesn't begin to encapsulate his unwavering dedication to his children, his grandchildren, his nieces, his nephews, his brother, his sister, and the entire extended family. As a father, he was such a driving force in each of his 5 children's lives. My brothers and sisters are truly amazing people. We are a very diverse group, and many times we have a significantly different view of the world. Yet we are all our Father's children. There is so much of him stamped into each of us. It's unmistakable, and it's easy to recognize. There is something for which I'll forever be thankful. Leonard will truly continue to live on through the values and life lessons he instilled in his children and in the many members of this family. While Judaism guided Leonard, and while Leonard guided his family, his wife Jean was truly his life's partner. I don't think my father really found happiness and balance in his life until Jean allowed that to happen. Leonard was a strong-minded person who could be, and oftentimes was, very set in his ways. But somehow, Jean could break through that. We all saw it, countless times. She wasn't just his confidant or advisor, she was his partner, his equal. And I don't think it's an incorrect statement to say that Jean is the only person in his life that he ever viewed in that way. And it made him an immensely better person because he did. My father had many, many things in his life for which to be thankful. I don't think he was more thankful for any of them. than for Jean. It would be impossible to talk of Leonard's life without also discussing Dr. Kosova. The thousands of cancer patients he treated and their families would absolutely agree. It takes a special person to commit their life to helping others during an incredibly difficult period of their journey, and yet for decades, that's what Leonard did. As a child, I watched my father leave each day for the hospital very early in the morning. He'd return home late in the evening. Many Saturday mornings, he would return to the hospital to follow up with patients and direct their care. His work ethic was unquestionable. That is something that really seared into my mentality. My colleagues and staff know me to have an incredibly strong and dedicated work ethic, and I know exactly where it came from. Someone I point to as a mentor in my career would sometimes say to me, "Jay, relax a bit. We're selling and fixing cars here. We're not curing cancer." Needless to say, that would always bring a smile to my face. My father built and enjoyed a fantastic life. There's so much more for which to be thankful. He was beloved and usually respected by this very large family. He couldn't possibly have been a better father or had more of a commitment to that responsibility. He had a life partner he was fully dedicated to and who was equally dedicated to him. He had a long and meaningful career that so positively impacted countless people. I was, and am, incredibly proud to have had Leonard Kosova as my father. I don't know what the remaining path of my life holds. I can only hope that in his eyes, he will be as proud of me as I am of him. We'll invite, please, Wes to come forward, after which, Ethan, we'd like you to come up and speak.
One day when I was 8, maybe 9 years old, my father decided he wanted some lights installed in the living room. This is when most people would call an electrician. Not Dad. Why would he call someone to do something he could do himself? Electricity is no mystery. He had a workshop in the basement full of tools and a chest of tiny drawers with every kind of screw and bolt and a terrifying radial arm saw that I was certain would one day take off my arm. To my young eyes, Dad seemed to know how to make or fix just about anything. So instead of an electrician, he called me. I had the 2 necessary credentials he was looking for in an assistant. I was small enough to fit into the crawl space in the basement, and I had no choice. I scrambled under the low ceiling to the back corner and waited while he pushed a long wire between the walls from the floor above. I could hear his muffled voice, "Feel for the wire!" I reached up behind the prickly insulation. The wire hit my hand. I grabbed it and pulled it through. He showed me how to strip the outer jacket and twist the ends. He showed me the difference between the hot lead, the neutral, and the ground wire. He showed me how to use a drywall saw to cut a hole and install a box and switch. The job was done. The day's lesson was complete. For Dad, wiring up those lights was in part about not needlessly spending money. As a boy who didn't have much, he had learned from his father how to fix things and do for himself. Even after becoming prosperous, Dad recoiled at the thought of frivolous spending. But it wasn't just about that. Dad wanted to install those lights for the pleasure of it, the simple satisfaction it gave him to use his wits and his own 2 hands to complete the task himself. In almost every aspect of his life, Dad chose to be a participant rather than an observer. And even better if he could pass on that knowledge and the confidence that goes with it to his children, as his father and mother had done for him. There were so many lessons like this throughout my life, some practical, some profound. When my sister Jamie dropped an earring down the bathroom sink, I got a lesson in using a pipe wrench to remove the trap and retrieve it. After that, it became my job to clear clogged pipes and later to fix a leaky toilet or replace a faulty light switch. When Deborah and I moved into our house, I was prepared. Now I have a workshop in the basement full of well-used tools and little drawers bursting with screws and bolts and a terrifying table saw that thus far has not taken off my arm. He taught me to fix the brakes on my bicycle and to change a car tire, how to lay to fill-in for Minion, how a suit should fit, how to install a hard drive on a computer, how to invest money. Even after we kids were established in our own lives and with our own families, Dad was always there for advice or just for a sympathetic ear. About work, marriage, negotiating a mortgage, how much insurance to buy, about raising kids. And of course, if any of us or our children was sick or had a bump or a rash, there was only one doctor to call. Dad was a great advice giver because he didn't tell you what he thought you should do. He listened, and then he asked questions that helped you decide the best answer. He was an intentional father. He loved us, and we felt his love in hugs and kisses and time spent together and long talks and so many holiday traditions and family gatherings and trips and fabulous meals and ribbing each other and a lot of laughter. But to him, fatherhood was also serious business. It was his duty to prepare each of us 5 kids to lead rich, fulfilling, meaningful lives in which we had the competence and tools to be in charge of ourselves. To be one of Leonard Kosova's children was to be enrolled in a lifelong curriculum in how to figure out things and engage the world on your own terms. My first class on my first day of college was a course in political philosophy. The professor began his lecture with a question, one he said was the basis for all Western philosophers. What is stable in a world of flux, he asked. In a world where everything changes, what can be counted on to stay the same? For me, the answer then and always was Dad. Dad was always there, always available, always eager to listen and to help. When I told Dad I was going to ask Deborah to marry me, he took me to Kaufman's Jewelers and showed me how to choose a diamond. He stood next to me for a small eternity as I held up one stone after another under a loupe, waiting for a sign from the universe that this was the one. He showed not a hint of impatience and appeared to relish the time together and the milestone it represented in my life and in his. I was months out of college and had no money for a ring. He lent it to me to be repaid a little each month. Dad loved Deb like she was his own, and she adored him back, which as her husband and his son gave me endless joy. When I started my first job and began to make my own way, Dad took me to dinner. He wanted to talk about what he had learned about money. A lot of people, he said, get confused about what money is. He said, money has value only because it enables you to buy things you need, and if you are fortunate, some of the things you want. It has nothing to say about your own value. Beware using money as a yardstick or a measure of success, he said. Someone will always have more, and even if you should be the one who has the most, all you'll have to show for it is money. When I was young, I could not appreciate how hard-won the lessons were that Dad was so determined to pass on to us. He was giving to us what he himself had had to work and struggle to learn. Dad was born in 1937 and was raised in a 2-bedroom place on the old west side of Chicago, or as his father and mother who immigrated from Poland would say, the West Side. Bernard, called Papa by us grandchildren, was a shoemaker and then bought a newsstand, which he ran for decades. Jenny was loving and strict and kept a kosher home. It was an immigrant neighborhood, and Yiddish was heard on the street. The family did not have a lot, and Dad and his sister Leah and brother Harold stuck to one another and to the large extended family who'd come over from the old country. This feeling for family stayed with Dad his whole life, as did his determination to do his part to uphold the traditions that Jews have passed on from one generation to the next in an unbroken chain stretching back thousands of years. Dad began working at a young age, delivering groceries, stocking shelves at a pharmacy, slicing lox with Harold behind the deli counter. He worked hard in school. He worked his way through University of Illinois and continued on to medical school to specialize in the growing field of oncology and hematology. All the time he worked, he gave back to the family, and he also kept some as savings for the future he imagined for himself. As a teenager in a post-war city full of opportunities and optimism, he set his sights beyond his immediate experience. He was surrounded by elders for whom America was the new world, but for him and his siblings and their friends, it wasn't new. It was the only world they had known. He was an American, but the mainstream of American culture was not quite his yet. He had to find his place in it, or rather make his place. He took the streetcar to White Sox games. He stood in the back at the Chicago Lyric Opera, developing a lifelong passion. Dad came of age at a moment of Jewish emergence in American life. It's difficult today to recall how casual and pervasive anti-Jewish sentiment was in mainstream culture before the war. But in post-war, post-Holocaust America, Jews of Dad's generation began putting down the foundation of a new cultural counter-narrative about Jewishness. They made their claim as rightful inheritors of the American tradition and equal members of society without boundaries. While still in school, Dad married Karen, Jamie's, Jason's, and my mother. They scrimped and saved. Dad's draft number came up, and after he completed medical school, he entered the U.S. Army as a captain, posted to a military hospital in Asmara, Ethiopia. Mom and almost 3-year-old Jamie went with him. When he wasn't on duty, he worked in a clinic treating local citizens. As the only Jewish doctor in the region, he performed dozens of circumcisions for the sons of Jewish expats and Ethiopian Jews. He was also called to treat the family of the Emperor Haile Selassie, who presented him with a gold watch in thanks. Along the way, I was born. Returning to the U.S., Dad and my mom built a large house in Northbrook, where then Jason was born. Dad was establishing himself as a physician on the rise, and Northbrook was then a new suburb where second-generation Jews were taking their place alongside Protestants and Catholics as Americans without a hyphen. Dad and Mom had married young and grew apart. When they divorced, Dad moved into a house 5 minutes away to remain close and minimize the disruption to our lives. In Jean, he found a true soulmate. She understood him and loved him with all her heart, and Dad plainly adored and revered her. It is easy to see why. She is quite simply one of the best people I have known. Brilliant, compassionate, and funny with an infectious laugh, she made Dad a better person and makes all of our lives richer. Jeannie, you are a great blessing to Deb and me, and to Ellie and Lily, for whom you are a true grandma. And of course, because of Jean, Jamie, Jason, and I have the gift of Abra and Ethan. And in Riverwoods and then Chicago, the family grew and continues to grow together. Dad worked long hours and spent evenings reading medical journals to keep up on the latest developments. His dedication to his profession and his devotion to his patients was boundless. Wherever we went as kids, it seemed someone would stop to shake his hand and thank him for what he'd done for them or a loved one, and to tell us what a great man our father was. He loved treating patients, and he also relished running the business of growing a medical practice. Always up on the latest technology, one evening he brought home a new computer system to be installed in the office. The next morning I woke up early for school to find Dad at the kitchen table wearing nothing but his undershorts. One half of his face was clean shaven, The other half was still fully lathered with shaving cream. He was pecking at the keyboard and squinting at the screen. He was so excited, he'd stopped mid-shave to try it out. Dad had made it, and he had made himself. His place was secure, and so was the place of his children. Both our Jewishness and our Americanness could be taken for granted. Because of Dad's labor and his determination for us, children, just one generation removed from Ellis Island in the Old West Side, the immigrant experience was now something we read about in our school textbooks. For Dad, this was reason for immense pride, but with an edge of caution. He was driven to change his lot, but what would drive us, his kids, who had everything and wanted for nothing? He'd worked to give us the opportunities and wanted us to feel compelled to make the most of our abilities. He wanted us to have it all, but we had to earn it. I wasn't going to raise any trust fund babies, he would say later. It could be difficult to live up to his expectations. He scrutinized our report cards to identify areas of improvement. Kosovas were always expected to do the extra credit assignment. He was a formidable and formal person. He lived by a set of rules he had written for himself and could be unyielding for reasons we did not always understand. He was not naturally given to conceding fault. But years later, all of this washes away. Now myself, a husband and father who has done as well as I can do, I do understand. Jamie, Jason, Abra, Ethan, and I will all have shared memories of Dad, but many more that are uniquely our own. He was a father to all of us, but also a father to each of us. He kept our confidences, shared our ups and downs, and we could feel his pride in us. Perhaps nothing, though, gave him more pleasure than his 8 grandchildren. With them, he could set aside the strictures of parenting and shower them with affection. The opportunity to indulge grandchildren was to him long delayed and richly deserved compensation for all the indulgences a father must somehow painfully withhold from his children. No such restrictions applied to his children's children, and he delighted in them. Soon before he retired from practice, Dad and Jean moved to Chicago. For Dad, it was a return to his roots on very different terms. In one of Chicago's iconic buildings with soaring views of the lake and skyline, the kind of place he only could have dreamed of living as a child. Chicago was his source and muse. He was a tireless international traveler and collector of the world's great cities, and he had seen them all. But Chicago was his place, and he loved this city deeply. In any weather, Dad walked miles each day, even as he grew weaker and walking became difficult. He wanted to take it all in. Years ago, I read The Adventures of Augie March, the ebullient novel that first put Saul Bellow, the American Jewish Chicago novelist, on the map. Published in 1953, when Dad was 16 years old, it tells the story of the son of Jewish immigrants in Chicago who sets out on his own, determined to realize his dreams and aspirations. The opening lines of that book ring in my ears today. I am an American, Chicago-born, Chicago, that somber city, and go at things as I have taught myself, freestyle, and will make the record in my own way. I would be hard-pressed to find more apt words to describe Dad's long, rich, consequential life. Dad, the record you made in your own way is all around us here today. It is written on the faces of your children and your grandchildren. It speaks through your wife and through your sister and your brother, through your nieces and nephews. It speaks through your friends and colleagues. It speaks through the families of the countless people whose lives were preserved under your care. You now take your place in that unbroken faith that links one generation to the next. Your link in the chain is now a part of time. It stretches back. It reaches forward. It endures. And all of us, Dad, you endure.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you on behalf of my family to everyone attending in person and online for helping us to remember my dad today. The last several weeks and months have been difficult, but the constant support from family and friends has been a source of steadiness for us all. My dad had 5 children, and despite a common thread of principles and values, we each had a unique relationship with Dad. And I'd like to share with everyone here today some of the accomplishments, characteristics, and memories that made Dad so extraordinary in my eyes. My father had a remarkable life story, as you've well heard. While I suspect that everyone in this room can identify with certain parts of his story, I marvel at the extent of his personal and professional accomplishments. To me, in many ways, my dad's life story has always represented the fulfillment of our version of the American dream. Dad grew up on the west side of Chicago, the son of immigrants, and what he lacked in money and resources was outweighed by a close-knit family, an strong immigrant community, and a Jewish identity, as well as a powerful work ethic. Dad worked straight from the time he was 8 years old until he was 71. He worked at grocery stores, drugstores, even a blood bank. He worked long hours in college and even during medical school. His explanation for this to me was always matter of fact. It's what I had to do. Whether it was helping his family as a kid or supporting his way through his education, he did what he had to do. And that meant working hours that would be unrecognizable even to someone in a similar career path today. As Dad continued his medical training and residency and fellowship, he started his own family. He served his country as a captain in the Army, where he was stationed in Ethiopia in the mid-1960s. He loved to tell stories from his time there, and he deepened his appreciation for other cultures and international travel, which would form the basis for a life of traveling and learning. Dad had many professional accomplishments over his 50-year career in medicine, and he took great pride in his profession and the relationships he established with patients. When he completed his training in hematology in the 1960s, oncology was not yet a formal specialty. He would go to oncology meetings and developed a practice taking care of cancer patients. When the first oncology board exam was administered in 1973, he did not sit for the test because he was one of the doctors who wrote questions for the inaugural exam. In 1975, he started the Cancer Care Center at Lutheran General Hospital, which was one of the earliest comprehensive cancer care centers in the nation and a model for oncology care going forward. Prior to this era, there were not many advanced oncologic treatments available, and cancer patients would often languish on general medicine and surgical floors at the hospital for long periods of time. The Comprehensive Cancer Center had physicians, nurses, and staff who were dedicated solely to the care of cancer patients. It was an environment that removed the stigma of having cancer and allowed these patients to feel that they had a medical home. Dad was also proud of the oncology practice that he founded and helped to grow. He was proud of the people that worked in the office, of his partners, that he would come to see his family, and of the practice's independence that allowed him to treat cancer patients in a way that he felt was appropriate. The practice moved to its own independent building in 1994, And his vision was also one where patients could get complete cancer care, from consultations to chemotherapy and radiation. One of the few joys of Dad's illness was his frequent trips back to his old office. He enjoyed reminiscing with people he worked with for decades, and it brought him back to a place that was such a source of pride and a place that helped to define his life. While Dad had plenty of professional accomplishments and memories, I think he was most proud of the relationships with his patients. I remember as his retirement date got closer, he would bring home a new stack of cards and letters each day from his patients. It was an honor for me to read some of these cards and see the appreciation and gratitude of the people he had cared for. Dad touched thousands of people's lives, often entering at their most difficult and vulnerable periods. I've always known the love and respect that our family has for Dad, but to see the outpouring of emotion from so many people in these cards made me realize how powerful an impact Dad had on his community. When he retired at the age of 71, I remember wondering how would he adjust to life without work or the practice of medicine. It was all he had known since the age of 8. In a fashion typical of Dad, he pursued a whole alternative set of intellectual curiosities that he had set aside during his 50 years in medicine. He enrolled in continuing education classes at Northwestern and University of Chicago, studying philosophy, history, economics, religion. He even completed a 4-year program at the University of Chicago on the foundations of Western civilization. He ended up teaching several courses and participating in transatlantic calls to discuss politics and foreign affairs, which he continued to do until the month before his death. Dad's life story to me is an example of what is possible in our country with determination and ambition. He certainly was not handed much materially as an immigrant son from the West Side, but as is true in so many stories of the American dream, an uncompromising work ethic, a sliver of opportunity, and a focus on education allowed him to reach great professional heights. While Dad had a variety of interests, he had several characteristics that were at the heart of his personality. Dad was determined and relentless. He attacked projects with preparation and persistence. This was true whether he was leading a class, designing every nook and cranny of his condo downtown, or building an extravagant dollhouse for Abra as a child. These traits were evident down to his final days. Even as he was confined to bed, Dad was finding ways to help me finish projects at my new house, sending YouTube videos on the proper way to wall mount TVs, and forwarding ratings from his beloved Consumer Reports on the latest kitchen appliances. Dad had a restless drive that would not quit, and no project was allowed to get the best of him. Dad was a Renaissance man. There was almost no conversation he could not participate in or frankly lead. He had an incredible awareness of medicine, politics, philosophy, economics, art, and music. He was a season ticket holder at the Lyric Opera for almost 50 years. And he took great pleasure in reminding me throughout my childhood that as a kid of the 90s, opera tickets were still harder to come by than Bulls tickets. Dad was a realist, he was logical, and he was pragmatic to the core. He approached problems systematically and had a way of talking you through your own problems in a way that felt comforting and supportive. Despite this very rational approach, he also had a core of optimism that ran through him. One of his favorite sayings was, "The future is always better than the past." If we were discussing politics and I would try to lament the direction of our country or the failings of our leaders, he would often use another favorite optimistic phrase of his, "This too shall pass." One of the ways that's helped me cope with the past few months has been to recount the times where I saw my dad the happiest. He took great pleasure in intellectual pursuits and challenges, but behind the scenes, it was the softer things that brought him so much joy. He loved spending time with his children and grandchildren all in the same place, no matter the location. Our trips to Mexico and gatherings in Chicago would be discussed and planned for months, and he relished the opportunity to have everyone together. He was also happiest on vacation with my mom. He loved having his best friend. He loved having his best friend as his travel companion on his tours of the globe. He would famously write the five of us detailed emails while abroad describing the latest museum he visited or the temple he discovered, as if he was writing a passage for the new edition of Frommer's. Dad was also at his happiest leading Jewish traditions with the family. He took great pride in leading the Passover Seder, building a sukkah with me as a child on our patio, erecting an oversized homemade menorah in our front circle in Riverwoods, and most recently hanging mezuzot on the doorposts of Abra and my first houses. My personal relationship with Dad will always be amongst my most coveted treasures. I am so fortunate to have shared so many moments with him. To me, he will always be my best teacher. He modeled intellectual curiosity. He challenged me constantly and sought out ways for me to grow. I have memories of sitting on his reading chair with him at 8 or 9 with the business section of the Chicago Tribune, and he was teaching me how to read the stock market tables and explaining the meaning of the different columns and rows. I will also remember our shared career path. Being able to discuss with him intimately the highs and lows of a life in medicine was a special treasure for me that deepened our relationship. In many ways, medicine became a strong part of both of our identities, and I cherished having this connection with him. It was a proud moment for me as a son to have my dad up on stage at my medical school graduation to perform my hooding ceremony. Our relationship evolved significantly as time passed, and I loved the moments we got to spend alone together, from skiing trips in Colorado, a trip to Brazil, and our U-Haul drives to and from Boston when I was in residency. As my relationship with my wife, Ashley, grew, it was such an honor for me to see the bond between Ashley and Dad deepen as well. She jokes to me that my dad was her first love in the Kosova family. And I'll never forget how excited she was when Dad took her out on a date before Ashley and I got married. Growing up with a dad who adored my mother and thought the world of her was the best preparation a son could ask for in developing his own strong relationship. Dad wrote me a letter for each major occasion in my life. These letters were quintessential Dad. They contained teachings and advice, but also the reflections and pride of my closest confidant and friend. Losing Dad in many ways leaves an aching hole, but I will cherish the relationship we built for the rest of my life. I got to spend a lot of time with Dad before his death. The most important thing to him after an incredible life was his family, and in particular my mom. To him, the greatest part of life was the relationships. Getting to watch my dad spend time with my daughter Hannah and build a relationship with her this past year was one of the greatest gifts he has ever given me. Watching Dad smile at her and Hannah touching his face and calling him Pop, Pop, Pop is a memory I will always carry. I can't help but feel regret and sorrow that my second daughter, due in May, won't have the same opportunity to meet Papa and form her own relationship with Dad. But at the same time, I take solace in the fact that everyone she loves and learns from in this family will undoubtedly be sharing their own story of what it was like to be loved by Dad. I love you, Dad, and I'll miss you greatly.
I share these words from Anne, Jean's sister, on behalf of the Busby family. Jamie, Wes, Jason, Abra, and Ethan, you hit the father jackpot. What a leader and role model he was, and your father could not have been more proud of you. Len wrote me a letter a couple of weeks ago and talked about his extraordinarily capable and successful children who are good people and good parents. He mentioned his 8, soon to be 9, bright and loving grandchildren, and he said, I can't ask for more. What a legacy he leaves behind. He talked about his long and successful career. But even with that, what brightened his face was talking about his family. Jean, Len loved traveling the world, eating fine foods, being a doctor and helping others, skiing the city of Chicago, reading, riding bikes, discussing world politics, the opera, home projects, consumer reports, and so much more. But what he really loved was you. He was devoted to you. You made him the happiest man. What a love story. You two have set an example for our family of love and caring and dedication and growing together and respecting each other. It has been remarkable to watch. It was clear to all of us, Jean, that you were the love of his life. I remember when the kids were younger, they would be appropriately embarrassed whenever music would start, and you two would be the first ones up dancing. One time in Mexico, Abra and Ethan said, "Mom and Dad, get a room." And what an example you set for them of two people in love. It must have been foreign to Len when he joined the Busby family, all of our game playing and card tournaments and watching sports. But after a quick nap, maybe from boredom, he would get some stimulating conversation and debate going that brought us all closer together. He was committed to our family vacations and would frequently talk of the importance of making time to be together. When he and Jean were visiting me in Florida last year, we spent a couple of hours talking about his parents, his sister Leah and brother Harold, and his early days growing up in a small apartment in Chicago. He told me how hard his folks worked at several jobs to provide for the family, what pride he had for his family and their hard work and perseverance. I remember noticing the joy in his face after he and Jean took a break to connect with family over Zoom for their weekly Shabbat call. He valued connecting even virtually with his family. Our sister Sue recently said, "I could tear up just thinking of the wisdom he graciously shared at each big event of our lives, and how he vulnerably stepped up to offer a toast that would anchor the moment for all of us. He wasn't afraid to show emotion. He didn't leave things unsaid. Jean, even before his death, he was taking care of you. He talked with me about wanting to make sure you had all the emotional support you would need. Today we celebrate a man who lived his life to the fullest and was not afraid of death. A man who leaves behind an incredible family and loving legacy. Len, we will miss you, but we know we will all be together again." We now call up Matt to share words.
Thank you, Len. Thank you for helping Abra and me weigh the benefits of different apartments we saw and choose our very first together. Thank you for pulling for the one closer to Southport so my commute would have been shorter. Thank you for, on the same night, offering me your mother's diamond to propose to Abra with, and for coordinating an introduction with the jeweler for me to see it through. Soon after Abra and I moved into that apartment, thank you for fixing it up with us and for us, showing me how basic tools work. And proudly proclaiming with a yell from the bathroom to Jean and Abra that I had installed the new toilet seat. Thank you for the new kitchen knives that night, after most everything was done, along with the wine, bread, and tears of happiness I saw. Thank you for so many of your happy tears over the years. Thank you for the ones when you were proud of me. I felt those more than words express. at the wedding shower for Abra. Thank you for the toolbox gift and the kind note about dividends it would pay to be good to Abra. Thank you for all the dividends you've paid me over the last decade. Mostly the love and steady support dividends. And thank you for always approaching me with a calm kindness, because I needed it that way. I wish any other possible dividends had a longer deferment period right now. Thank you for my first nice suit. Thank you for going to multiple stores with me to find a perfect one. Thank you for telling me about the different styles, what kids were doing nowadays with the shorter length, and leaving that up to me to decide. Thank you for bending down and checking the tailor's mark behind my feet and making sure it was just right. Thank you for your strength, always, but especially over the last 2 years. Because I don't think any of us could have handled an abrupt end without some gradual steps of new expectations to adjust to. How do I try to repay you? I try to honor our family. I try to be good to Jean and Abra, the girls and myself. I try to stay close with everyone. I try to give Emery and Reagan a stable presence who's predictable and consistent. I continue to try to be relied on by my family. Thank you, Len. You want nothing more than a close family. Like you'd say, after all, that's what it's all for. And I'll strive to work for that closeness to continue.
These are Lily's words of appreciation. My papa. I'm sure my papa is so many different things to the people in this room. Friend, family, healer, and so much more. I've been blessed to know papa as one thing, my grandpa. To be the granddaughter of papa meant an unconditional love. It meant picking up the phone to hear the sweetest, "Hi, sweetheart." It meant knowing what a privilege it is to see the most sweet and nurturing side of someone who I admired endlessly. Papa was a rare breed. Even after achieving what some might consider the American dream, the biggest thing of value to him was always his family. He will always be the glue of the Kosova family. A day never went by when I didn't feel absolutely adored by Papa. If you know what that feels like in the slightest, you've struck gold. In his final weeks, Papa wanted to have conversations with all of us. During mine, I somehow ended up being comforted by him. What he told me was so simple, yet will be held on to forever. Life will be good, life will be great. You'll see.
The final tribute comes from Ellie. My papa was a man with many pieces to him. He was passionate, he was intelligent, he was determined, he was brave, he was funny. But above all, he was loving, and I think the things he loved described him best. Papa loved Judaism and keeping traditions and teachings alive. Some of my earliest memories are of Papa sitting at the head of our Passover table, chanting prayers in a booming voice, but singing kid songs about frogs on Pharaoh's head with the same joyous abandon. Papa loved helping people. He was committed to his job and to providing people the best treatment at some of their darkest times. He cared deeply about his patients. Papa loved learning. He continued to grow, evolve, and acquire new skills throughout his whole life. He was one of my greatest teachers. And he was also a student, taking classes at the university and devouring books and articles on every subject imaginable. Papa loved beauty. His childhood enchantment with opera blossomed into an appreciation for all kinds of art, from painting to music, each capturing a glimmer of the human experience. Papa loved Chicago. When we would walk down the street together, he would reminisce about familiar neighborhoods and point out differences in the landscape. It struck me how he talked about the city like an old friend. No matter how much it changed, its heart remained the same, and it had his. And Papa loved his family. He treasured every moment he spent with us. When we were younger, he was never too busy to talk about our school day or too tired to read another book to us. When we were older, he was always there to remind us through hardships that we were valued and that our greatest strength was in having each other. In my Papa's eyes, our family could overcome any obstacle. And I can see today that he was right. When Papa passed away, his light didn't go out. His love for life helped ignite each of ours and those of everyone that he touched. I now have a list of names of all the patients he cared for over the years. This was lovely. This was so appropriate. Truly a giant. Len did ask one thing of me, to sing the song Hine Matov. A simple song. We all learned it in second or third or fourth grade. It's one of those simple songs, but that's the one he wanted. He liked the song for its simplistic message, and that is that of community. The community of the people of Israel, the community of Congregation Beth Shalom, the intimate, loving community of his medical practice, and then the nuclear community of you, his family. His hope was that in hearing these few words, that his most sincere message to you all about life would be loud and clear. Stay close. Stay loyal. Stay supportive of one another. Stay focused on the blessing of having one another in your lives. Be accepting of other people. Be in the moment, for no one knows what tomorrow shall bring. We are all blessed to have benefited from his friendship and his guidance. The words translate very simply how good it is that we can be together. Join me if you will. She'edahim gam yachad. Hinei matov she'edahim gam yachad. Hinei matov she'edahim gam yachad. Hinei matov u'manayim she'edahim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim she'edahim gam yachad. God's gift to us is life. Len's gift to God is having used his years of life to their fullest, with honor and respect for all of God's other children. Let us do the same. And in doing so, we will cast a bright, warming light upon his soul as it journeys to its eternal place in heaven above. Please stand for the final portion of a memorial prayer, after which we'll be directed as to how to exit the room. Malot kedoshim torim kizohar ki hamazhirim et nishmat label ben bero shalach liolamo v'gan eden tehem menuchato ana barachamim Hastirei hu beseter knafecha liolanim utzero bitzero ahayim et nishmato Adonai hu nachlato v'yadluach b'shalom Shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. The soul of Dr. Leonard A. Kosova, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. May he rest in peace. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated.
You may be seated.
In addition to everybody that was here today, there was about 24 devices that were signed in during the funeral, so probably another 40 or 50 people were joining you. The interment will take place at Memorial Park Cemetery in Skokie. If you're planning on going to the cemetery, we would ask you to form behind the hearse, remain in the parking lot. We'll be passing out flags. Drive with your high beam headlights and your flashers on. If you're not going to the cemetery, we'd ask you to please exit from the driveway on the east side of this synagogue. After the interment, the family will be returning to the clubhouse at Mission Hills, 1677 West Mission Hills Road. They'll be receiving people from about 2:30 till 8 o'clock tonight, and that information's in the pamphlets that we've handed out. Also, for those of you that aren't going to the cemetery, the interment portion of the service will also be broadcast on mitzvahfunerals.com, and look for Leonard's website, and you can watch that as well. The following have been asked to act as pallbearers. Wes Kosova, Jason Kosova, Jen Kosova, Ethan Kosova, Brendan Songard, and Matt Siegler. At this time, if everybody would please rise, and if the pallbearers would please come up to the casket.
שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד,
Shepherd